Hello, and welcome to our webinar series, Trend Hunter 101, where we teach you the basics of Trend Hunter. I'm Armida Escano. I am your host, the Chief Content Officer here at Trend Hunter, and for today, we are focusing in on the innovation assessment. So we have our Chief Operating Officer, Jamie Neely, here. How are you, Jamie?
I am great, Armida. How are you?
I'm good. Very excited for today's topic. Aside from our Chief Operating Officer, Jamie is also the inventor of the innovation assessment. So, Jamie, tell us a bit about the innovation assessment.
Yeah, diving right in, our innovation assessment is such a unique tool that both individuals and teams can use to evaluate their approach to innovation, how they problem solve, communicate, work with others. It's got universal use for both teams and for individuals. Now, a little bit more background on the assessment. It was formally launched in 2016. And what really inspired the assessment was the methodology of our CEO, Jeremy Gucce's New York Times bestselling book, Better and Faster. We'll get into the methodology a little bit later on. But another great thing about the assessment that gets me super excited is that we've had 70,000 global participants come through the tool so far. And this is a tool that's used by hundreds of brands across hundreds of industries, really. And it's great because we have such a unique sample size of participants.
That's awesome. So there is no kind of particular type of company or certain industry that the assessment is targeted toward?
Definitely not. There is value that both any individuals and any team really can get from this tool.
Nice.
Now, one of my favorite parts about the innovation assessment is the insights that we're actually able to glean from those 70,000 participants that have come through. We're able to make these really fascinating observations about what's going on around the world when it comes to innovation and kind of the state of the workplace today. So from the assessment, we know that 51% of professionals feel that they don't have enough time to work on new ideas. 53% don't believe that their company has a strong innovation strategy, and a whopping 43% don't know who is responsible for innovation at their company. And when you compare this to the fact that I think the number is around 97% of CEOs list innovation as a top priority, this shows a huge gap between what that CEO is expecting and how employees are feeling and how they understand those objectives. So the assessment is such a unique tool to help so many different individuals and teams and companies kind of close that gap and really diagnose what is going on.
Woo! Definitely a hot topic right now, considering, post-pandemic, offices reopening, that sort of thing. It's very interesting, also a little bit concerning. Would people who use the assessment, would companies and organizations who do the assessment be able to find out how their own employees, how their own team would respond to these kinds of questions?
Absolutely. When you go through the assessment, there is actually a section at the end where you are able to answer a variety of questions, where you're able to kind of score your own company in relation to a variety of innovative things. And we then take that data and we're able to compile that for companies with different participants. So you can actually see specifically how your employees feel about how your team is doing when it comes to innovation.
Right.
Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so good.
Right. Something to work on in every result.
Absolutely. Now, diving into the methodology of the assessment. So the assessment evaluates both individuals and teams on 6 key traits. And these are the 6 traits that you see in the middle of that hexagon on the slide. And we believe that these 6 traits play a unique role in being successful and being innovative, both as an individual and as a team. And we've actually divided the traits into 2 groups. So this is where the methodology really comes in from Jeremy's book, Better and Faster. So on the left side of the hexagon, we have our farmer traits. And then on the right side, we have our hunter traits. I'm going to get into what that actually means. But one important thing to note too is that each of the 6 traits has what we call a double-edged sword. And this is the trait that you see on the outside of the hexagon. So all of these traits, of course, they can play to your advantage, but at the extreme, they could also play to your disadvantage. And as I've mentioned already, individuals and teams are evaluated through the same lens. So it's really a lot easier to kind of understand how this applies to you, and then also how it's going to apply to your team.
Gotcha.
So let's get into these farmer traits. So the farmer traits are all about being loyal, consistent, and discipline. So someone who has a farmer mentality, they have a strong desire to maintain success, typically by optimizing existing strategies and tactics. They like to kind of follow what they know works and kind of improve based on those. They really value structure, organization, and predictability. And they're very loyal to a company's pasts and traditions. And this is all great, but maybe one of the kind of downsides or things to watch out for when we're working with farmers is that they may approach new ideas with a little bit more caution, which means they tend to be a little bit more risk averse.
Right.
Now, I personally am a farmer, so something that I'm very mindful of, but we often see the farmer traits pop up in legacy organizations, so companies that have existed for a very long time. There's a lot of tradition, a lot of history, probably a lot of red tape too.
Right.
As I mentioned, they're more likely to exist in those large established brands where breaking out of some of those norms can be a lot more challenging than maybe in a smaller organization. And of course, we see these pop up in more traditional job functions. So job functions too that may have a lot of, restriction or policy around them. Oftentimes things like healthcare, jobs that involve safety, banking, things where risk really, cannot be taken lightly.
Gotcha. Going through this, I can completely see what you mean about the double-edged sword. It sounds like you need farmers on your team, but also there are certain things to look out for, certain kind of natural inclinations that can sometimes be a bit of a barrier. So what are some other examples, aside from the ones you listed here, of how farmer traits manifest usually in the workplace?
So you can often rely on the farmer to get things done.
Oh, that's where your farmer comes in. Okay.
To follow up on things,
Right.
to make sure, if you've laid out a 10-point plan for a new project, your farmer's going to make sure you're on track, you're hitting those deadlines, those milestones. They have a backup plan. They're really making sure that the ship kind of stays afloat on track.
Yeah.
But in doing so, that does mean that they don't have necessarily a lot of capacity or even motivation to explore some of those unknown or untapped paths, because they're really focused on getting the job done, which every company needs that type of mindset,
Right.
or nothing would get done.
Right.
So
Thank your farmers, everybody. Okay, so I guess next you'll tell us a bit about the hunter.
Absolutely. So the hunter traits, we have these as curious, insatiable, and willing to destroy, which sounds really cool. But again, there are pros and cons to what we see present themselves with kind of that hunter mindset. So a hunter, though, unlike the farmer, they're very motivated to disrupt and create change. They have a desire to move quickly and fix things later. There's no backup plan for the hunter. They just kind of have a plan or no plan and go with it right away. They like to jump right in, which is very, very different from the farmer. They are very inspired by the possibility of new opportunity, where the farmer gets a lot of satisfaction from doing a good job, delivering results. That's not necessarily something that the hunter is after. They want to chase something new, something that could present a breakthrough idea. And unlike the farmer as well, they really prioritize growth, expansion, and taking risks, even if those risks are a bad idea. Now, we often see the hunter traits, they're much more common in smaller organizations or even smaller departments. There's more agility there, there's less red tape, it's easier to get things done essentially, or to change the path of something. They're very common in like startup environments, and of course they're more common in like strategic or creative roles, roles too that often have a little bit more autonomy, greener roles. So sometimes there are also environmental, or not environmental, but cultural factors that can foster these traits a little bit more as well.
Right. So correct me if I'm wrong, but Trend Hunter as an organization is more hunter.
We definitely are more
Okay.
hunter. So are a lot of our clients.
Yep.
A lot of them, of course, they're working in insights, they're working in more strategic, creative roles, coming up with new products for the future.
Mhm.
So naturally, they are a little bit more hunter leaning.
Right.
But, you know, you'd actually be surprised. We do still find that that farmer mindset can be very, very present.
Interesting. So kind of same question as on the last slide. You listed like quite a few examples of what you would see with a hunter dominant personality or profile, I guess. What are some other examples of what you can expect from a hunter on your team?
Asking why,
Aha.
why we're doing something, you know, really wanting to make sure that a group has really discussed all of the ideas before committing to one.
Right.
They probably would lean more into a riskier option than something that they know has worked before. They're more likely to kind of play devil's advocate. They also really want to get moving quickly, which drives the
Right.
farmer crazy.
Right.
Farmer wants to go into a project organized, have all the stakeholders looped in. A hunter, those are just minor details.
Right.
They can deal with that later. They kind of like to dive in. On maybe kind of the extreme too, they might step on some people's toes if it means they can move a little bit quicker to get something done. Maybe they'll take some back channels
Sure.
to get information that they need. But this as well provides kind of that spark that farmers don't necessarily have because
Gotcha.
you know they're focused on other things.
So there are a couple things in there that you said, for example, the hunter will move really fast and that may, you know, be uncomfortable for a farmer. What are the advantages then to having an all hunter team?
You'll probably have some really crazy creative ideas, which of course is good, especially in today's market. You know, everybody's coming up with a better idea
Right.
every second.
Right.
But you won't necessarily have anyone to make sure those ideas
Or actually
happen.
feasible.
Yeah.
Right.
So you really do want to kind of find that delicate balance, that sweet spot between having farmers and hunters though who understand one another.
Right.
And the assessment is great for that because, you know, when you can kind of look at your behavior and your traits through this lens, it can help you understand, okay, so this is where some of my gaps are, but we have people on our team who can fill those gaps.
Right.
So they can be very complementary, even though they're totally opposite of one another.
Right. I mean, I think you and I are a great example, or even yourself and Jeremy, I think
Yes,
our CEO.
definitely. Yeah,
Excellent
I'm
example.
a double farmer, which I'll get into, and he's a double hunter. So
yeah, it makes for interesting times, but good work together.
Absolutely.
Now you answered this a little bit in your answer about an all hunter team. An all farmer team, I'm assuming then would be sort of everyone is, looking after the castle and kind of keeping that legacy up and keeping everyone on track to do a good job, but not necessarily pushing to new heights and pushing for new ideas.
For sure. An all farmer team would be very efficient. Everybody would get everything done by 5 p.m. Everything would be, done with lots of attention to detail. But there's a good chance that you won't have, an office to go into if you're all farmers, because someone could easily outcompete you. And out innovate you.
Interesting.
So it's tricky.
Yeah. You kind of hint to another question that I had there, which was, is it ideal to have more hunters if you're in innovation?
I mean, I guess the simple answer to that question is yes, because your hunter mindset, they are the ones who will likely find those pockets of opportunity where it may be a little bit more challenging for a farmer too, simply because they're not really hardwired that way.
Gotcha.
But this doesn't mean that farmers can't innovate and that they don't play an important role in innovation.
Right.
But generally speaking, if you do want to, kickstart innovation or come up with, some quick ideas, your hunters would probably be your go-to for that. But then again, some farmers would be able to maybe temper that in a way that is often needed.
Yeah.
So, but generally speaking, yeah, your hunters, they're going to be coming up with some of those, light bulb, wacky out there ideas that often really do kickstart innovation.
Right. All about balance.
Yes.
All about balance. And then one last question before I let you keep going. Are there any traits that are a problem? Like, are there any traits that should be avoided?
And I mean, not one single trait is kind of like, the bad stepchild
Right,
or
right.
anything. I think they all have their, as we've talked about, advantages. And then at the extreme right, they of course can be problematic. For
Right.
instance, willing to destroy. That sounds really cool. Clients are always excited when that's one of the traits that they get, like, oh, I'm willing to destroy. But the flip side of that is that you actually could be perceived as way too reckless
Right.
by your colleagues. And you could actually burn bridges, you could lose trust, you could actually cost your team, your company a lot of resources.
Right.
So, that's an example. Moving kind of to the farmer side, though, we have consistency. Consistency is great. You want to work with employees who are consistent, who you can rely on, not only for their work ethic, but you can trust them. But kind of the flip side of that is that consistency can also mean complacency. So you could have a colleague who's totally satisfied with just doing things as they've been done and isn't really motivated to try something new, which of course also is not great.
Yeah.
So they each have things to be mindful of.
Right.
But there's no one single trait.
No inherently bad.
No.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool.
So moving on to the innovation archetypes. So the innovation archetypes, this is what you actually you're assigned one of these when you go through the assessment, both as an individual and as a team. So what is an innovation archetype, though? People are often like, oh, mine sounds so cool. Mine doesn't sound so cool. And I always tell people the innovation archetype, yes, it's important, but what's even more important is understanding the traits that go into that innovation archetype.
Okay.
That's really where you're going to get that insight. So each innovation archetype is made up of a primary and a secondary trait. So from those 6 traits that we just discussed. And we have a set of double hunter archetypes. So that would mean that your primary and your secondary trait, those both fall in the hunter camp. We have a double farmer, I should say, archetype, where both your traits are farmer.
Like you.
Like me.
Yes.
And then we have the hybrid archetype. So you've got a little bit of a mix.
I'm one of those. Yeah. Relentless creative.
I think that's a double hunter.
Oh, it's a double. Oh.
Yeah, which doesn't surprise me. You don't you don't strike me as as a hybrid or a farmer. So, but yeah, hybrid archetypes, these are very common for organizations to actually receive as their archetype, because we know that companies do want to innovate, but especially some of those larger ones, there are things within their organizational kind of structure and culture that may be preventing them from fully pursuing that hunter mindset, whether it be the history of the company, cultural norms, red tape, you name it. So here we have an example on our archetype matrix. We have the zealous quarterback. So zealous quarterback, this is what we would refer to as a hybrid archetype, but let's learn a little bit more about what that actually means. So when you go through the assessment, both as an individual and as a team, you'll get this trait breakdown to learn more about, okay, I have my archetype, but what does that actually entail? So we'll go through your primary and your secondary trait. We'll go through all the pretty details, all the fun details, but then we'll also kind of teach you and show you how those traits could play against you, perhaps. So I won't go through them fully here. I won't go through all of them, but for the zealous quarterback, the primary trait is loyalty, and that, of course, is a farmer trait. Now, the flip side of that is, being a bit too protective. So loyalty is great because it means you're hardworking, you're dependable, you're really motivated to provide high quality work. But the flip side to that is you may be too protective of the success that you achieve, too protective of the way things are done within your company, which could then make you risk averse, less open to new ideas, and therefore, maybe sometimes challenging to work with.
Gotcha.
Now, the secondary trait for the zealous quarterback is all about insatiability. So insatiability, that's the hunter trait. This is all about really wanting to move quickly on ideas, really wanting to get into action. And of course, that is great. You need to move quickly to innovate. But on the flip side, it may mean too that you're actually dissatisfied. So you may grow tired or bored easily of the things that you're working on because you're moving a mile a minute. So you might just abandon it. So you may have all these great ideas that you start, but you may not actually see them through. So
Got it.
What purpose does that serve?
So very clear advantages and disadvantages in the results.
yes, we really do want to paint a clear picture because, we often can have some clients who say, oh, well, it does seem like the hunter traits are favorable. They're better. And that is not the case.
Right.
Both camps of traits have, equal amounts of benefits and things to look out for. So we do try to really paint a clear picture of that in the breakdown that you get when you take the assessment. And then taking it one step further, we also like to illustrate just how extreme you are for those traits. So the red dot would be how far you skew to that. So for some individuals, it turns out that they're actually quite balanced. So they would have answered, 50% of the questions more towards loyalty or more towards willing to destroy. And then the same could be said for the secondary trait as well. So we like to highlight this because it can indicate to someone, especially if they feel like, I don't know if I fully relate to that trait. Sometimes I do, but sometimes I don't. This can provide a little bit more clarity and insight into what the results show.
Right. I love that. So there's sort of a range of exactly how much of this trait you're displaying.
Exactly.
Does that possibly change over time?
It wouldn't necessarily change inherently. So the purpose of the assessment is to look at your inherent traits, but you can become more mindful and aware of your traits. So while these traits may not change in your deep down core, you can use the assessment as a tool to become more mindful and self-aware. So you can learn, when you may be too reactive or maybe too protective. You can better identify that and say, okay, no, I'm going to actively try to think differently.
Gotcha. That's how I recommend people use astrology.
Exactly, right? Now, getting into some of what else is included in the actual innovation overview, what you get in individuals and as a team, will break a variety of things down. So the team overview definitely includes certain things that the individual results don't. So in your team overview, you're going to get things like, your most common archetypes within that group. So you'll be able to not only compare your own results, but you'll be able to see where your colleagues are kind of falling as well.
Ooh,
yeah.
Love that. So is there a difference in when a team overview would be used versus an individual?
I think, you typically start with your individual one.
Gotcha.
But for that team overview, it's, if you're looking to kind of diagnose something within your team, if you feel that there is a gap between how leadership perhaps perceives innovation or feels that they are, mandating a certain type of innovation or expectations around it, but employees may feel a completely different way.
Right.
You can use that team overview to not only identify what that gap is, you can identify where there are opportunities perhaps to, focus in on. You can also then generally learn more about okay, these are my individual strengths. I wonder how this compares to the team. So you can learn kind of, it is the average results of everyone who participates in an overview, but you can then learn, okay, this is the main strength, what we need to work on, what are the gaps there. So it's, provides more of that, of course, the team look, that team perspective. And yeah, I think for individuals too, if you're looking to focus on ways to develop, that's obviously where the individual one comes into play, whereas the team one, it's much more of a diagnosis of, where is innovation, what's the state of innovation and culture really within the team.
I was going to say, for the majority of, so obviously, considering you are the creator of this assessment, you do the vast majority of the innovation assessment workshops, which I'm sure you'll talk about later. I know that in a lot of them that you've done for clients, especially lately, it is from a diagnostic perspective. It's from this sort of, okay, my company and I, we've gone through this huge change, as has everybody with the pandemic. We're trying to reopen our offices. Our culture has changed. Where are we at right now? What do we need to work on? And that's typically how you see the team results used, I guess.
Yeah, and people too, companies will want to know, hey, we think we're innovative. Let's do the team overview. And truthfully too, many leaders and teams, they'll want to know how employees actually feel about their company.
Right.
And again, sometimes it isn't always super positive, but I think it's so crucial to be able to take that step and say, we do want to get to the bottom of this.
Right.
Where should we actually be focusing our
Right.
efforts? And
Right.
the team overview can provide insights into, of course, as I mentioned at the beginning, what do employees think about your company's innovation strategy, but it even gets into things like, do employees feel that they can freely share ideas? Is innovation something that is openly discussed? Is there a formal process for sharing ideas? And of course, this can, once you know this information, you're equipped with it, can make better decisions.
Yep. Awesome. So we talked a little bit about the workshop. We talked a little bit about how recently clients have been looking for a kind of diagnostic. Do you have any other examples of how our clients typically use the team overview?
Definitely. So some will simply want to use the assessment and the team results as literally like a bonding activity.
Oh, that's nice.
Like a team building activity. So to have more open and candid conversations about different people's work styles, actually socializing them, learning about them, and having people feel kind of comfortable and proud about owning what their archetype is and learning about the other archetypes and how they can better work together. Then we'll have some teams that, they really want to use the assessment on that more diagnostic level where they really want to pinpoint what's going on culturally. They'll know that they have some issues they want to work on, so they'll use the assessment to almost kind of validate and verify that.
Got it.
Specifically too around, certain issues where there could be, again, that disconnect between what leadership perceives them as creating in terms of an innovation mandate. And then, the assessment results will show that employees are on a completely different page or planet even. So we'll use it to really kind of kickstart a conversation about what that team would need to work on, what they as a culture want to prioritize moving forward. And then from there, we have a variety of activities and exercises that we build around kind of what they want. And then another really interesting part too of the team overview, the deep dive, I'll talk a little bit about that later on too though, is we're able to look at the data we get from the assessment based on a variety of demographics.
Oh.
So gender, generation, location you're taking the assessment from. So for some big companies, they may come to us and say, look, we have a huge challenge with Gen Z and Gen X.
Right.
They're completely misaligned.
Right.
Could be millennials and boomers, right? That's kind of stereotypical, but that's just an example. But we can then actually, validate for them, verify, there is actually a gap between how these two groups are approaching innovation, how they feel about the company.
Here's why.
Yes, exactly.
Love that.
So, and it isn't always the case. We'll have some results where there really isn't any difference between those groups. But in some, there will be a staggering difference. And sometimes, too, that will actually be a surprise for clients. So they're actually getting some bonus value out of the workshop, even if it wasn't what they were expecting.
Very cool. So anything else included in the deep dive?
So the deep dive will provide essentially a deep dive analysis of how every single question of the assessment was answered based on all of those groups. So you will immediately see any gaps very, very specifically. And the deep dive too, this is not something that is accessible to everyone. This is part of kind of the premium product. So you only get access to the deep dive if you, of course, want to pay for it or if you go through the workshop. But it really is that very thorough breakdown of what is going on with your team.
Great. So what are we looking at here?
So here's an example of how some of the demographics could actually play out with a specific question. So this is just a sample. This is from a sample overview. So as I mentioned, you won't necessarily see these types of gaps across all teams, including your own. But here you can see that the ways that women versus men, how they've answered questions, staggeringly difficult. So where it asks, which is your bigger strength? Is it executing a plan, which would fall on the farmer side, versus thinking of new ideas, which is more of the hunter trait? You can see that women lean much more towards the farmer trait here, and men lean much more towards the farmer trait. And there's also a staggering difference between I think that's Gen X and Boomer.
Yeah.
So I would want to have
Huh.
have a conversation with the client to be like, hey,
Have you seen this?
yeah,
Yeah.
how does this make you feel? Like, is this something
Interesting.
you're observing? So really interesting that we can provide this data and this insight. As I mentioned, it's not always going to be something that comes up for each team overview, but when it does, it's always so useful to have.
Got it. So that these kind of like demographic discrepancies, you're saying sometimes they pop up, sometimes they don't. Would you say it's become a common challenge, or it's something that nowadays you only see rarely?
I think it really depends on the organization,
Mm-hmm.
not only in terms of the size of the organization, but also the culture that already exists there.
Yeah.
I think that's really, really important. I do think we are starting to see more of these discrepancies pop up. However, because of the pandemic,
Yes.
people have been separated.
Right.
So any of those differences, they've had time to kind of fester on their on their
Totally.
own. People haven't, been forced to interact with not only colleagues but colleagues from different groups, and in a way that definitely has created more of a gap there.
Sure, that's kind of why I ask. And I mean, you know this, but my expertise at Trend Hunter as a futurist is in these generational trends. And for one, as you said, now everybody is coming back into these offices, and after a long period of literal isolation, you have to start interacting with people again, which can always be a little bit weird. But there is also the fact that Gen Z is now entering into the workforce. And so I am curious to see, and I wonder your opinion on this, if now that we have like a 4 generational office experience, if those differences will be more pronounced, if we'll see, more kind of extreme variations in terms of how different generations want to be managed and that sort of thing.
I think definitely from Gen Z,
Mm-hmm.
they are such a unique generation to look at from kind of the workplace perspective, because for many of them, let's say they graduated from university right before the pandemic,
Right.
they've never had an in-office experience.
Right.
And I actually predict that this whole experience of the pandemic is going to bring millennials, Gen X, boomers closer together.
Oh my God, that would be so funny.
So Gen Z is kind of going to be the new millennial, right? Where
Yeah.
everyone's wondering,
We need a
scratching
common
their
enemy.
head, yeah, what is going on? So it's going to be really interesting
Mm.
because, yeah, there's tons of articles and research done out there. We've even done a bunch on it, how Gen Z has very different motivations when it comes to the workplace, their professional lives, their ambitions, what they actually see as desirable for their career.
Yeah.
So it will be very fascinating to continue to study this and observe what's going on over the next 10 years as the situation continues to evolve.
Yeah. Bit of a hard hitter, but do you think that these kind of generational differences had anything to do with the Great Resignation that we've all heard so much about last year?
Well, we do know, and one thing to point out, Great Resignation still very much happening, unfortunately.
Great.
across all industries.
Right.
But absolutely, I think because so many younger people, whether that be Gen Z or even, later millennials, younger millennials, I should say, they haven't necessarily had that time to forge those relationships or feel loyalty to certain organizations and colleagues. So for them, they are able to kind of detach themselves a lot easier. And, for them, the grass does look greener.
Right.
And they don't necessarily have that experience yet that some more tenured professionals do.
Right. So we talked a lot about how, the highlighting the ways to manage a multi-generational team, make the assessment a really great tool for just becoming a better manager, becoming a better leader. In what other ways does the assessment help a manager or leader improve?
So I guess, there's so much information that you can learn about your team and their preferred working style when you have the results of the assessment at your disposal. So when you're equipped with that type of information, equipped with, whether or not your employee views themselves excelling at A over B, you can actually strategically then decide, okay, these are the projects they're going to work on. If they tend to have a farmer mindset, they're probably an individual who doesn't like things to be kind of sprung on them last minute. They like to be able to prepare for meetings. These are very small details, but that can really make such a big difference in an employee not only feeling kind of heard, but feeling empowered.
Right.
They can then, their work style and how they kind of optimize their strengths, if that's being heard and recognized as well by their manager,
Yeah.
it's going to make for a much more healthy collaborative environment.
Right. And better performance as well, because the path has kind of been cleared and customized for however they like to work.
You're not going to try to keep putting, giving a farmer these hunter tasks.
Right.
Doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to find opportunities where you can push
Mm-hmm.
a farmer to think like a hunter, or encourage a hunter to maybe embrace some of those farmer tendencies.
Yeah.
But yeah, it really can be a really good guiding principle. The more you know,
Mm-hmm.
the more you'll be able to create and establish that trust with your direct reports, and create a team that is working on things that optimize and play to each person's strengths.
Yeah, that sounds nice.
Yeah, I know, right?
It sounds awesome.
It's not rocket science.
All right, so we mentioned the assessment workshop a few times, but we haven't quite explained what it is to the audience just yet. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about the workshop and who would get the most out of it? What does it look like? What does it entail?
Definitely. So as we kind of touched on it, but the workshop can take a few different shapes. So again, it really depends on what your team wants to get out of it. So if your team is looking to use the assessment as kind of a kicking off point for, getting the team back together, if you want to learn a little bit more about working styles, have it as like a team building activity, that's one way. We've also had a lot of clients use it when they've like restructured teams, or they've created a brand new team and they want to be able to get to know one another, learn how they can really optimize the strengths that exist, and then also kind of make a game plan for, okay, we're missing these traits. We recognize these traits are important for what we're trying to do. How can we then make sure that we are actively trying to implement those? So we also use it again from that diagnostic perspective, where a team, they will know that they have some challenges internally with their culture. They want it to be more open to innovation. They want employees to feel more excited and incentivized about innovation. So we'll actually use the workshop to figure out how we can create that incentivization. What are the cultural changes we can make internally at all levels within the company for people to be ready to innovate? And oftentimes that can be pretty intense, right? You're breaking down routines and norms that have existed sometimes for decades. And it can be a pretty touchy, sensitive subject. So it's a really great, though, collaborative effort where you can get many different voices involved to openly share, where they see some of maybe the downside or areas of improvement.
Sure.
And then focus on what they want to prioritize and how they can, implement positive change, and making a game plan for actually sticking to that.
So you mentioned it can get a little bit intense. I'm assuming like preparation for that sort of thing is definitely a way to lead to the success in a workshop. What other factors would lead to a workshop being very successful?
I think first and foremost, you got to check your ego at the door.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, it as a leader too, it can be challenging and difficult to hear that your team doesn't feel supported in pursuing new ideas,
right,
or they don't have a clear idea of what to do with their new ideas, or they aren't sharing their ideas with managers or colleagues. So I think it's being able to kind of like take a step back and being open to hearing these results, but then open to, having a candid conversation about them, checking the ego at the door, and instead focusing on some of the challenges that they may have been going through, and perhaps getting defensive, focusing on the solutions moving forward.
Right.
So definitely being open to, hearing your results. Oftentimes what we'll do with clients too is we will go through the results beforehand.
Yeah.
So if there is, we don't want to catch anyone by surprise.
Yes.
So we often do offer that as a service. Many people take us up on that. But yeah, I think everyone being open and really celebrating the different strengths of everyone.
Right.
And understanding that, okay, so you got a farmer score. That is not a bad thing.
Yes.
That's a great thing.
Right.
And really acknowledging that there's so much diversity that can be leveraged and optimized within any team, and it should be celebrated.
Right.
Not really, defended as something bad.
And balance is a good thing. Thought diversity is a great thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. That's awesome. So, how can someone start using their assessment? Is there a fee to kind of take it? How long does it take to find out what your archetype is?
Yeah, no, the assessment, you can take it. It's a complimentary tool on our website, so you don't have to even be a client. We of course want people to be able to learn about their archetype. We also are so fascinated by how people feel about their company. So we encourage anyone who wants to take the assessment to do it. It takes about 10 minutes to do, so it's not a super lengthy tool. We understand that some of those, questionnaires, they can take a whole afternoon. That wasn't what we wanted to do. We wanted it to be very seamless, very
Nice.
quick, but still provide value and insight. So when you take the assessment after the 10 minutes, fill out a few things about, what industry you work in, because of course we're also interested in that. And then you're immediately sent your results.
Nice.
And then with a team overview too, as soon as you've had 10 or more people from your organization take the assessment, you are automatically sent an auto-generated team
Ooh.
overview. But you, of course, doesn't stop there. If you want to have more people added, if you want to have different departments that you want to actually compare within your company, that's something we can do too. That is part of more of our premium product, but anybody can take the assessment and anyone can get a team overview.
Wow. So the team overview, at least the most basic level, free.
Yes, absolutely.
Amazing. And are there any updates coming to the assessment?
Yes, so we're actually releasing a redesign, which we're super, super excited about. Our design team in-house, they've been working extremely hard, coming up with some beautiful stuff. So we're really excited to be rolling that out in the next
Very
couple
nice.
of months. And then in terms of data that we're able to provide to people, one thing we're hoping to do is that right now we're able to benchmark how your team compares against all the other people who've gone through the assessment. And that's always interesting. But what would be even more interesting is understanding how, your brand, your company in CPG compares to other CPG brands.
Ooh.
So that's something that we're also looking to add in, and I'm really excited about that because I think it will have just even more use for people to kind of understand where they are in terms of their competitors.
Right. Help develop that competitive edge, even culturally.
Exactly, yeah.
Amazing. So we're pretty much at the end here, at least in terms of the questions I have. I guess one fun question to end on. What has been your favorite part of developing this tool or doing these workshops with our clients?
Wow. It's been so long since I've worked on the assessment. I think it's really exciting when I'll do a workshop with a team and they get excited about their archetype and their traits, and they are able to use the tool as a way to, as I kind of mentioned earlier, like celebrate their unique work style and collaborate with colleagues on how they can each kind of play off of each other's unique strengths. So seeing it as a way kind of celebrate that thought diversity and lift it up as something that's positive,
Right.
as opposed to something that may actually divide people in the past.
Sure.
So it's been very rewarding in that way.
Okay, well, awesome. Thank you so much, Jamie. I think that wraps us up for time. Anything else you want to say to everybody about the assessment before we go?
If you haven't taken it yet, go do it. And if you have any questions at all about the assessment, how you could use it yourself, use it for your team, feel free to reach out to assessment@trendhunter.com and I'll be more than happy to connect with you.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for watching, and thanks, Jamie, for telling us all about the assessment.
This was fun.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.